So I know that all of you are joining me in welcoming our speakers and expressing appreciation to them for their help in understanding what's going to be, I think, an important change for Evanston. I don't know whether you all have decided how you want to proceed. I guess I was thinking that Eleanor might start with the overall picture and then turn it over to Christopher for talking about some of the specifics, but go ahead.
Or I'm happy to let Chris go first, since he's been
okay.
on the job all day long and is.
I appreciate that. It works either way for me.
No, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to address the League of Women Voters. As Ms. Hayford mentioned, I am the acting communications coordinator for the city of Evanston. I'm not an officer per se. I'm a civilian employee, as all telecommunicators, dispatchers are. Our staff at this point, we have 14 telecommunicators. The normal staff is 16. We're in the midst of hiring more. I'm going to cover just kind of the basics of what to expect when calling 911, as well as the triaging that a dispatcher does before and during the dispatching and call taking process. So I'm going to share my screen. I did a PowerPoint kind of covering everything. So hold on while I get that going. So everybody should see that now. Tell me if you're not.
Good.
All right, so we'll go right into it. The first thing is that the 911 center is the nerve center of the Evanston Police and Fire Departments, and everything for public safety begins here. That's a recent picture of our 911 operations with 3 of our dispatchers on the floor at the time. And the next slide, it's going to be a recently released PSA on what to expect when calling 911. This was recently sent out last week on the Evanston Police Department Facebook and Twitter accounts, as well as it's available on the City of Evanston YouTube channel. Hopefully this plays well. It was kind of problematic when I set it up. As the first responder, a 911 telecommunicator is tasked with gathering information necessary to determine an emergency or life-saving response. In an emergency, seconds count. So when the circumstances arise for someone to call 911, knowledge of what to expect can be the key to a successful resolution to any event.
Evanston 911, where's your emergency?
The industry standard for greeting any 911 call is to identify the agency that has been reached, followed by a question asking for the location of the event. Like in real estate, the most important factor is location, location, location. Be prepared to provide your current location to the call taker. This may involve taking a moment to get your bearings and determine your location. Street signs and major reference points and/or buildings are critical in determining the location if the caller is unfamiliar with their surroundings. Once the location has been identified, the next most important question is, what is happening?
Are you okay enough to tell the operator what happened? Yeah, the guy, I'm watching him right now, pull a knife on me, took my keys.
Here, the caller is tasked with providing a brief description of events that lead to the 911 phone call. Begin by explaining the type of emergency. For example, I've been in a car accident. There's a trash can on fire in the alley. My husband is having trouble breathing. This succinct description points the telecommunicator in the direction of questioning necessary to determine the best response. It is important to point out that this line of questioning does not delay the responders. Many times, when a caller is speaking to the call taker, another telecommunicator has already conveyed the emergency to the responders in the field. With the where and what portion of the call covered, the caller should expect the call taker to delve into the when, who, and when relevant to the call, weapons, hazards, or injuries.
He's running a prairie hat right now, dropping their glasses, white shirt. A male white? Male white shirt,
A clear picture of the offender provided by the caller to the call taker will help eliminate the need for officers arriving on scene to gather the information themselves in order to determine the nature of the event. When an offender is known to the caller, providing a name may prove helpful in the event the agency has regular interactions with the offender. When describing the offender to the call taker, it is best to provide information in a top to bottom fashion. Best estimates on race, age, height, and weight are also important. For example, the offender is a male white, about 30, 5'7", and less than 200 pounds. He is wearing a knit hat, puffy red coat, blue jeans, and black boots. Painting an accurate picture of what someone looks like will help responding officers know what they are looking for. The safety of the caller, other citizens, and our first responders is of the utmost importance. Therefore, if weapons are involved, implied, or readily available during the event, the caller should let the call taker know. Be as specific as possible on the type and number of weapons involved. Making a 911 phone call is never easy. When making the call, the caller should stay calm. Remaining calm will greatly help the call taker gather information. Speak clearly. By speaking clearly and directly into the phone, the call taker will be able to hear and understand the caller. Know your location. Whether at home or out, the caller should take a moment to gather their bearings in order to provide a correct and dispatchable location to the call taker. Know your phone number. Call takers will ask to verify the caller's phone number in case of a disconnect. Be prepared for questions. As the caller, be prepared to provide short, accurate answers to the questions previously outlined. Thank you for joining me on this PSA on the City of Evanston 911 Center and its integral function in public safety. Stay healthy and safe.
Okay, so this is the first of what should total 5 PSAs that we're intending on doing regarding 911 operations. Some of the other PSAs will get into some aspects like when should you call 911 versus, say, calling the police or 311, or the police desk or 311 for the circumstances. Another one will cover what's known as emergency medical dispatching, which I will show you a little bit further on one of the slides. And then the last 2 will cover what happens after you make the 911 phone call, like how the dispatching process is, and then making 911 phone calls in the age of cell phones, which I'll cover a little bit in one of these slides. So going a little bit further, what does a telecommunicator do? As the PSA mentions, they'll receive your call and conduct an initial survey. Based on that survey, they're going to send the type of response: police, fire, EMS, and when the subcommittee is done putting together the plan for alternate response, that would be the determination of if an alternate type of response would be sent. The telecommunicator is going to ask key questions of the caller and relay any additional information that they receive to the first responders. The questions are asked in a journalistic manner of questioning, beginning with where, followed by what. And at that point, if weapons are involved, they're going to ask what type. Who is involved? When did this happen? Which is important to determine whether or not it's an emergent circumstance at this point, or what we commonly refer to as a cold response, something that happened hours ago or days ago. Why did this happen is generally not asked, but it may in certain circumstances be a question that is asked. Why is generally determined by the responding units. Further questions help piece together the emergency. How did the incident occur? Hazards, what hazards are present? Are the victims and responders to the location aware of these hazards? So say, for example, an overturned tanker truck. You're going to want to know the hazards involved in that, specific to what type of chemical that tanker truck may have been carrying. That's pertinent information. Injuries, is anyone injured? How many and what kind of injuries are we dealing with? At that point, the dispatcher is going to start using the tools of their trade, computer-aided dispatching terminals, which we track units in the field with, the telephone system, which is where we receive 911 admin calls, make calls going out, transfer calls, phone-related stuff. At the radio system, our radio system is for the police department and fire department. We dispatch through the Motorola MCC 7500 Elite dispatching system. We use EMD, or emergency medical dispatching software, for doing pre-arrival instructions. We receive text and 911s, which is something that is in infancy at this point, but should reach a more prevalent interface in the future, hopefully in the near future, that we're waiting on some state level stuff to come to fruition first before we reach that. Command Central is our text to tip software. So if you ever want to convey some information anonymously to the police department, say there's a location that regularly you're seeing some questionable activity occurring at, but none of it's reaching emergency circumstance level, you can anonymously text a tip to the police department. Information for that is on the City of Evanston website. And you text to the number CRIMES, CRIMES, in the recipient, and begin the tip with EPD tip. And then from there, whatever your tip is, it will route to us and we'll forward it to the required person to follow up on it. And then one of the last very important tools is with a third-party company known as Rapid SOS. And I'll go a little bit further into that. Rapid SOS is a internet-based company that gives us some valuable tools that help us to determine location when people are calling from cell phones. First, we'll cover emergency medical dispatching. We contract with a company known as PowerPhone. And when we receive an EMS-related call, our dispatchers will begin the emergency medical dispatching process. During that period of time, they're asking for the circumstances of the emergency, determining what kind of medical circumstances are happening, and then following that up by providing pre-arrival instructions, including CPR instructions when necessary. This allows the medical circumstances to be handled in advance of the fire department arriving on scene. Fire department is extremely quick in the City of Evanston, but every second counts in a medical emergency, and emergency medical dispatching helps. This is just an example of the interface that they use for emergency medical dispatching. And you'll see it starts with the basic questions, and from there, each of these questions unfolds to a more detailed instruction based on the answer that the caller gives the dispatcher. And then in case the program isn't working, we have flip cards that we can go ahead and grab to give the exact same sequence of questions. And you'll see the ones in red are the far more problematic emergency situations as opposed to the ones in gray or yellow. That's an example of texting to 911 and just kind of breaking down how it works. 4 major carriers allow for texting to 911. And I should say now it's 3 major carriers because Sprint and T-Mobile are the same company now. There's a character limit to it. At this point, no pictures or video. And if it doesn't go through, you'll get a bounce back message that says it doesn't go through. Basically, just put 911 in the recipient field and text the information, and it will route to the agency that you're in. So if you're doing it in Evanston, it will route to us. If you're in Skokie, it would route to Skokie if they're set up for it, which I believe they are, or Chicago for that matter. And then this is how that text presents itself to us on our end. So we will get the phone number, we will get the message, we'll be able to respond back to you. And when the phone is capable of it, we will get location information on a map. That's what the anonymous tips look like and how they come in. We don't, obviously you can see we don't even have a phone number that's coming from, just the information related to what the tip was. This particular tip was a vehicle that's parked in front of a fire hydrant for 5 hours. So an officer was sent out there, and I'm sure a ticket was issued on that one. And then going back into Rapid SOS. So Rapid SOS is a company that provides a free of charge interface to 911 centers, or was referred to as a PSAP, Public Safety Answering Point. And they've partnered with cell phone manufacturers to provide more pinpoint location data by leveraging the information inside of the cell phone. So the GPS in the cell phone, the hot spots that it's hitting on, all of that give us information that helps us determine where the caller who calls from a cell phone might be. And it's far more accurate than the data that we're receiving from a cell tower. We use this and it automatically interfaces with our phone system. So it queries that information automatically to give us a far more accurate picture of where you are. It is still very important to know your location, but this is an excellent tool for helping us find you in the event that you don't know your location. Landline versus wireless, a civic address landline will give us in dispatch in the 911 center the direct location that you are calling from. It's known by the phone company, so it is provided to us. It'll provide the subscriber information as well as the callback information. That's also true for VoIP, or voice over internet protocol. So if you have a phone, if your home phone is provided by your cable company, you have what's known as a VoIP phone. It's providing information over fiber optic lines as opposed to telephone lines. It's providing the same information for your civic location, but it's based on your billing address. So if you change that, it's also going to change where the phone routes to. So if I have a cable subscriber and I'm getting a phone provided through them, and I decide I want to change my billing address to my place of work, not my home. When I call 911 from my phone at home, because I changed the address, it's going to route to my place, the town that my place of work is in, not my home address. So you have to be careful with VoIP lines. They're extremely portable, which is great, because you can actually take a VoIP line on a laptop and you can go overseas and make a phone call and you just pay whatever the rate is. But remember that when you call emergency, it's going to call whatever the billing is for that VoIP line, and it's going to route to that 911 center. I had that happen one time when there was I believe it was a Northwestern student was in Germany and had taken their VoIP line with them, and they needed a German emergency, called 911, and it came to Evanston. And I'm like, I can't transfer you to Germany, but I'll help you out as much as I can. I think we managed to find the actual 7-digit, or in Germany, I think it's like a 10-digit number for them to call to get a hold of the police department for the German town that they were in. It wasn't easy though. Wireless is a proximity thing. So if you don't have a phone that can work with the Rapid SOS platform that I was mentioning before, and this is not going the correct direction, then we will get a proximity. And that proximity is based on triangulation of 3 cell towers. You find those 3 cell towers kind of figure out the longitude and latitude and give you a rough estimate. But it's not 100% accurate. Technology hasn't unfortunately gotten there yet, but it's moving that direction. And that's what next generation 911 will provide. That will provide not only more pinpoint accuracy, but eventually we'll be able to provide video calling to 911. So you could FaceTime 911 and show us what's going on at that time. Telematics, which is automatic crash notification. I believe there are vendors already working on that, just like OnStar used to be, except now they're doing it through cell phone technology, which is far more reliable. The ability to send us images, the ability to send us text without us having to use a third-party program. Those are all coming in the not too distant future. As a matter of fact, the revenue generated from for 911 funding is some of that is being used to build out next generation 911 for the state of Illinois. This just kind of goes deeper into it. I don't want to take up all your time on that. And then the radio system that the operators use is the Starcom 21 system, which is the digital radio system. It's been a huge benefit to our operations. It's far more reliable and has more interoperability. As a matter of fact, any program that we work with someone in the alternate 911 response plan, they will be issued a Starcom radio so that we can speak with them in the field and provide them information as we get it, and they can provide information back to us, and they'll be on the same frequency that the police department will be on, and we'll be able to convey to the fire department, so that we'll keep them as safe as possible in the event that the circumstances turn bad, and something, God forbid anything goes off the wire, or off the rails, I should say. As part of our police functionality, we answer 911 calls and non-emergency calls, monitor police radios, maintain beat integrity, or making sure that the officers are remaining in their area to be the quickest responses possible, and then process all types of inquiries for the police department. For the fire department, we do the same thing, monitor their radios, dispatch them, keep them in district as often as possible, and then keep all of their information we're tracking in the CAD system. The dispatching equipment, we have 5 911 wire lines, 5 911 wireless lines, so we can take up to 10 simultaneous 911 phone calls. 3 non-emergency lines, and then we have a direct connection line with the Northwestern University Police Department. Those are just some examples of the frequencies that we monitor. Last week was National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, which we like to recognize the telecommunicators for the job they do. And we had a very nice collection of gifts and meals bought for the dispatchers during that week. So they were definitely shown the appreciation for the work they do. They're kind of the disembodied voice. We like to make sure that they are recognized when the opportunity presents itself. And that's just a rundown of what the agency did in 2020. And that's actually a reduction of call volume because of COVID. Our volume was down a little, but that's just kind of a breakdown of what they do every year for handling of the police and fire events, the number of calls that they take or make. But they handle approximately 244 calls a day between incoming and outgoing calls. So it's a good workload. They stay busy. So I want to thank you for the opportunity again to kind of run down what the operations of 911 are. At this point, I'll answer any questions that you have in reference to the slide or any of our operations, and or even how we're going to integrate into the non-emergency response plan or alternate responses. Yes.
Sorry, Christopher, is the 2020 volume of calls handled similar to the 19?
No, it's probably a good 15% reduction in call volume due to COVID. We definitely saw a reduction between March and I would say roughly July. We were down by quite a bit. Medical calls even reduced, which we thought was interesting because we thought we would see an increase in medical. But I think what happened is a byproduct of COVID. People were hesitant to make calls to 911 for not emergent issues, but the issues like, I'm not feeling so hot today, I want to go to the hospital, which we will, take the call and get them going. We saw less of those. So there was definitely a reduction.
When you were finishing, you referred to the fact that with a new operating process being developed, you would be triaging the calls in a different kind of way, because you would have people responding to calls who were previously had been police but might not be police.
Sure.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, and what won't change is the manner in which we handle calls. All calls will be handled in the same manner. The questioning that we engage in is to determine the circumstances of what is going on and make a determination if it meets the requirement for one, for an emergency response, and then two, which agency responds to it. So what we foresee happening in an alternate emergency response plan would be the determination would then become, okay, this is not a police matter, this is not a fire matter, this is a matter for the alternate response team. So from the triaging point of view, very little will change. We will still ask the same sequence of questions. We will still try to gather the same amount of information. It would just, what will change will be how we then dispatch that up. I hope that answered your question.
Go ahead, Lois.
Well, I was just wondering, for instance, if it's a mental health or a domestic violence call,
Sure.
And an alternative provider was identified to go to the scene, would a police officer still respond as well and just not be the intervention person, or?
So that's going to vary based on the circumstances of the call. In a domestic violence situation, anything involving violence would involve a police response. In those circumstances, I would foresee, and this is something to be fleshed out, and I don't want to speak ahead of where we are in the subcommittee portion of it, but we're not going to put any of our partners into a dangerous situation. There will be circumstances where they will be responding in coordination with the officers. And then there'll be circumstances where they'll be responding without an officer at all because the circumstances don't warrant an officer's response on that. Or there'll be circumstances when all three or more agencies will be responding: police, fire department, and the alternate response committee team, dependent on whether it meets that criteria. The dispatchers are trained to recognize, they take classes and ongoing education in crisis intervention training, de-escalation, verbal de-escalation techniques, and they're all pretty good at being able to determine when a situation is worse than is even being conveyed on the phone. So we feel confident that this won't be a huge change for them. It'll just be a new way of thinking how to disseminate the information.
It does sound like there's a huge responsibility that the dispatchers have to, as you described, get lots of information.
Yeah.
And one of your guidelines is that the caller should remain calm. I can't imagine that is always the case.
Well, I mean, guidelines are always the best of circumstances, right? You kind of you want to convey it, you want to say, hey, remain calm, but we also understand that, and this is one of the things that I kind of drill into anybody who wants to get into dispatching, or even those who are seasoned dispatchers, that while you may know as the call taker that the situation is not as big an emergency as the caller does, it's an emergency to the caller. So at that point in time, calmness may have gone out the window. And so there are techniques in which the dispatcher, call taker, will be able to try to calm the caller down, or even reach the point where they need to be more forceful with the caller to get the information. It's a by circumstance, it changes from one caller to the next. And sometimes you can only get the most basic of information, which is why we shoot for the where first, because now without the where, we can't help you, because if we don't know where you are, the what doesn't matter, so we go for the where, move into the what, and then at that point, if you want to cooperate and give us more, we're all for it, but not every caller is cooperative. That's very true.
Christopher, there was also a question in the chat about something you referred to with medical emergencies, and you talked about the medical people being followed by a fire truck, and the question is, why is a fire truck always going when it's clearly a medical issue and not a fire?
Sure, and that's an excellent question. So all of the pieces of equipment, as they refer to them in the city of Evanston, are what's known as ALS, Advanced Life Support Capable, meaning that they have, from an engine to a truck to an ambulance, they have the ability to provide advanced life support help to anybody. So that's a change that has happened over decades, where engines previously were specific to handling fires, but they managed to put equipment onto those engines that allow the firefighters on the engine to begin the life-saving work necessary. So the way that the engines and ambulances are deployed in the city of Evanston, we send both an engine and an ambulance to a medical call, because the engine may beat the ambulance there. So because it's closer. For example, in the northwest sector of Evanston, the closest engine's over on the 2800 block of Central, and that one's going to get there a lot faster than the ambulance, which comes from the 1300 block of Emerson. So now the response plans are set to be the most efficient response possible. But occasionally, like say, for example, the ambulance that's over at 1300 Emerson is on another call, the next closest ambulance is now all the way down in the 700 block of Madison. So by having the engine respond in a concert with the ambulance, you're guaranteeing that we have a roughly 2-minute and 45-second response time. We remain in that 2:45 response time.
No.
And Chris, did you say you have 10 lines available?
Yes, there are.
Does that mean you have 10 dispatchers?
No. We have, we schedule 4 dispatchers per shift. We have a minimum of 3. One person works the police radio, one person works the fire radio and handles the 911 calls. And then the other person is the backup. They answer administrative calls and back up the positions, so that when the fire dispatcher leaves, they take that over. When the police dispatcher leaves, they take that. In the event that there are 3 incoming 911 phone calls simultaneously, all 3 of those operators are going to pick those calls up, and they're going to work the phone call plus whatever other responsibility that they have at the time. They're going to be doing them together. Multitasking is something that telecommunicators have to be able to do. We drill it in as much. And we know that multitasking is truly, like, real multitasking is a fallacy. We know that. You know,
Thank you, Chris.
yeah. But you focus on one, and then you put as much focus as you can on the other. It's all about triaging. It's all about being able to move to the most emergent situation at a time. Yes.
How many callers do you have in total on the staff? And how long is a shift?
What you mean, like how many call takers?
Yes.
They're all call takers and they're all dispatchers. So that's why we call them telecommunicators, because they do all of it at once. So even though their responsibility at the time may be to be dispatching, they have to be able to answer the call. So essentially we have 3 call takers every single shift. So as the calls are rolling in the event that we have more than one coming in, somebody else is going to pick that one up. And then if they're on an administrative line, they're going to put that one on hold and they're going to go to the emergency line. There's a difference. The rings differ. It sounds 911 phone call sounds different coming in than an administrative line comes in. You know how like sometimes you'll have a double ring for an internal phone call versus a single ring. It's that, but it's far more prevalent than that. You can definitely tell the difference. So they know at that point, I gotta end this one or put this one on hold and go to that one because emergency phone calls take precedent. So, and the shifts are 12-hour schedules. They work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for the day shift, and then 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. for the night shift. It affords them the ability to have more days off during the year because their rotation it gives them that opportunity. It's something that we moved to about 15 years ago. I was actually one of the dispatchers at the time when we did that, and it was a huge change for us. It gave us a lot. Those extra days off were good for our stress or de-stress.
So here's another question on chat. It's, if you don't mind, Connie, and because it's a core question. The question is, I think, how does the dispatcher know who to send to the call?
Sure.
And if you can say anything about how that may change in the coming year.
So for the police department side of it, it's dependent on where the call originates from or where the call is intending to send us to. So officers work in what's known as a beat. It's just a geographic location of Evanston that's smaller. There's 8 beats total for the city. So that keeps them in a more truncated area. If they're available, then the beat officer would be the first one to go to the call. And then if they need a backup, you'll get them from an adjoining beat, or you'll get them from what's known as a cover car. For the fire department, the computer system is constructed to automatically determine which pieces of equipment, available pieces of equipment, would be the quickest to get there. And that comes from, we subdivide the city into 40 different grids. And then from there, we set a hierarchy of pieces of equipment. And then the computer tells them, and then if that piece of equipment is gone, it goes to the next one. And if that one's gone, it goes to the next one. And then if all of them are gone, we have what's known as mutual aid. And then we start rolling Skokie, and we'll met ambulances and engines in as we need them. And then for an alternate response, that would be dependent on how I think that breaks down for where the partner agency would generally be at a regular time. But for an alternate response, you know, you're talking about something that's not necessarily an emergency. So in those circumstances, if the partner agency has 2 people in a vehicle, you're just gonna send them wherever they need to go in the city, regardless of where they are at the time. And because they don't need to get their lights and sirens, as we colloquially call it.
Connie.
What kind of resources does your department have in the event of a really huge tragedy? For example, a house explodes from a gas main and you get 8, 10, 12 13, 14 neighbors calling into 911 at the same time to report it. What happens in something like that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that actually, things like that actually have occurred. Not not a house explosion, but a large enough fire to involve that many phone calls. So you triage the phone calls as fast as you can. You as a dispatcher, you know that something has just happened that is beyond normal, because your screen lights up with all of these incoming phone calls. So the dispatchers are at that point expected to get as much information as quickly as possible as these calls are coming in, and making sure that you're not neglecting to find out where the caller is calling from in the event that somebody, say you have 10 people calling all about one thing, but the 11th person is calling about something different. You can't presume that every phone call that you're taking is related to the large explosion that just happened. So you're going to find out where the emergency is. Are you calling about XYZ, whatever's going on? And if they say, yes, I am, you're going to say, do you have this info? Do you have any further information to kind of flesh out the picture? And then you're going to say, we're on the way to it. We're responding. In the event of a large scale fire, you're going to be using every piece of equipment in the city of Evanston. So what we end up doing, and the fire department will call what's known as a mutual aid box. And at that point, we have a predetermined set of pieces of equipment from outside agencies that will start coming in to help fight that fire. And not only just that, they'll come in to roll down to fill staffing in other stations, so that when we get further calls, fire-related emergency calls, we now have available pieces of equipment from other agencies. That's what's known as a mutual aid box alarm system, and it's handled by almost the entire North Shore. Has an agreement in place, and we work in concert with them to handle large events as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Christopher, this has been tremendously informative and useful. And I we'd love to have you stay longer, but I know that you're eager to get home. And I know
That's
that.
okay. It's all right. I can handle it.
Okay, if you can say that, I think we'd like to also hear from Eleanor, about how this alternate system.
Sure.
Want to go
Sure. I
first?
think there's somebody with their hand up. Cheryl.
Cheryl, yeah, I just wanted to ask if a young person, a child calls, does the location that they're calling from automatically come up on your screen?
If they're calling from a home phone, then yes, we get their location automatically. If they're calling from a cell phone, we use the interfaces that we have now to pinpoint the location that they're calling from, and then we'll send somebody to go and see if everything's okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Generally we'll ask, hey, your mom or dad home? Can you put them on the phone? And that normally works. They'll put their mom or dad on the phone. We did have one kid though that was pranking us for a while. This was 10 years ago, before the technology got really good. But we leveraged all the information that we had. We ended up finding the kid, and officers talked to him and told him he can't do that. So he was just having a little bit of fun.
Thank you.
So, but yeah, I don't want to take up the Alderwoman's time to have a conversation about the alternate subcommittee, which she and Alderwoman Fleming have been spearheading, and it's been quite the experience to see how it's been getting more and more fleshed out. It's an exciting opportunity, I think.
Thank you.
Are any other questions for me? No. All right. Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope that this has enlightened you on the operations here. Hopefully nobody has to call 911 in their life, but the city of Evanston we pride ourselves in giving the best service that we can for emergency operations. And we have a group of people that definitely meet the challenge each and every day.
Well, it's very impressive, and I'd love to hear more about how those people get trained, but I think we'll have to save that for another night because that sounds like they're doing a terrific job.
Well, if it's all right, my email is available to anybody. It's cvoss@cityofevanston.org. And the operations in the 911 center are always open to the public to come and see. So you
That would be interesting.
send me an email and we'll set it up. COVID restrictions being as they are, we'll just make sure everybody's masked up. We are all vaccinated. So, but we still need to be careful.
Yep.
But at any point in time, anyone is welcome to come and I'll give them the $5 tour.
Great.
All right.
Thank
It
you
does
very
cost
much.
$5 though. You have to put it in the tiller.
Great. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right. Have a good night, ladies. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, Eleanor, can you tell us about how things might change? And
Right,
and
sure.
how you've developed a plan for change? That's
Right, yeah. Well, that was really interesting, though, to hear from Chris Voss about, I mean, the more I learn about our police department and our fire department, the more impressed I am about just all the different aspects of it and the technology they use. And it's really, it's quite something.
right. It's very complicated and impressive.
It is, yeah, right. Okay, well, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let me just see, where is my, oh, pooey. There we go. Okay. So it's very interesting to be giving this presentation tonight when we've just heard about the verdict in the George Floyd case. And because basically it was the conversation in the aftermath of the police killing of George Floyd last May that really precipitated a whole, huge conversation about policing in all parts of the country, as well as here in Evanston. And, urgent calls to defund the police, reform the police, redirect funding from the police budget to social services, to reimagine public safety for our community. So it was there were marches, there were demonstrations in front of all of our aldermanic homes on various nights. And while this conversation was underway, I came across an article about a different approach to public safety, a community-based public safety model that provides a mental health first response for crises involving mental illness or homelessness or substance use. Let me just see, where am I gonna, how do I get to my next screen here? There we go. And that program is called CAHOOTS in Eugene, Oregon, Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets. And it was started by the Whitebird Clinic in Eugene, Oregon. And they, that clinic works particularly with marginalized people in the community. And so they basically approached their police department about trying to set up this alternative mobile crisis intervention approach. So when the police department in Eugene receives calls for assistance with certain types of behavioral issues, a CAHOOTS team is sent. A CAHOOTS team has one mental health crisis worker and a medic. And the team assists the person in the moment of crisis, as well as with follow-up services. So I thought it's not only that it's the response in the moment, but it's particularly the ability to continue to work with these individuals in crisis and really help them get on a path to a better situation. So this program's been in operation for more than 30 years. It has a great track record of providing much needed care to the community's vulnerable populations, and it saves the police and fire departments time and money. It demonstrates that many 911 calls do not require a police response, and indeed that an alternative crisis response team can provide more support that can really help the individual in crisis. So let me see here. I'm still learning how to do these things here. Why does that not want to work here? How do I get to my next slide? Pooey.
Down.
I'm doing, there we go. Okay. So that, yeah, I summarized that. Let me just go to my next slide. So I shared the information about the CAHOOTS model with the City Council, and we agreed that the Human Services Committee should go ahead and consider whether this model would be a good fit for Evanston. So the Human Services Committee, as you may know, usually meets just once a month, but the members of the committee agreed that we would meet as much as weekly if needed in order to really try to come up with a program, given the community's really intense interest in rethinking public safety for Evanston. So we committed to, really a pretty strenuous series of committee meetings. And so first we did is we wanted to learn about what existing support programs there are in the community, and we do have quite a few. There's a 24-hour crisis line at Amita St. Francis. And as part of our contract with Amita for that crisis line, they also have a behavioral health clinician at the Evanston Public Library who does a lot of work with homeless individuals or people needing to be connected with important support services. The fire department had a program also with Amita called Evanston Community Health Outreach, ECHO. And what they did there was the fire department and the hospital see a lot of people who come in again and again and again to the emergency room for their basic medical care. And so the ECHO program was aimed at providing these individuals with home visits to help them learn better how they could manage their own health situations. And so they wouldn't need to use the emergency room as often. We talked a little bit about victim advocates with Chris Voss. That the victim advocates are within the Health and Human Services Department, but they're actually physically in the police department headquarters. And they deal with things like domestic violence, sexual assault. If there's been a death, they will go to meet with the family to help them deal with the aftermath of a death. So they're dealing with really very different kind of situations than we'll be talking about for the alternative response team. Then, as you know, we have a youth and young adult division that works with young people really up to about the age of 30, I think, and help them get connected with support services to be able to become more successful contributors to our community. And then we talked with a lot of different nonprofit groups in the community, the YWCA, the Moran Center, et cetera. Why is this? Anyway, several, definitely a couple of meetings to learn all about these different programs. And we also, of course, learned quite a bit from the Evanston Police Department. Really a majority of the police officers have had this critical incident training, which helps give them the tools they need to deal with a lot of mental health situations and crisis situations. And when the 911 dispatchers get a call that it seems like they intentionally send a CIT trained officer to respond to those calls that sound like they need, that might be someone with a mental health issue, for example. We got a lot of data from the police department about the 911 calls that they get, how many they get over the year, what types of calls are they, the number of calls for each type. And we tried to figure out, well, which types of calls might be the best for this alternative response program. So things like well-being checks, nuisance complaints, a disturbance, an unwanted person. So as we move forward with the program, we're going to need to work with our dispatchers to fine tune exactly which kinds of calls will be the best ones for the response team. Come on, there we go. We also learned about a couple of programs that grew out of, who were inspired by the Cahoots program. One was in Olympia, Washington. They have a crisis response unit, a crew team, and their program is within the Olympia Police Department. And their teams are a behavioral health specialist and a peer support person, someone who has a life experience with mental illness or homelessness or something like that. They do not use a medical person the way they do in Eugene, Oregon. And so they just started their program in 2019. And it just operates, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's a pretty, it's a long day. They have quite a huge homelessness issue in Eugene. And so that's a big focus of their program. And then the other program that just got started recently, also inspired by Cahoots, is in Denver. And their program is also, again, with the Denver Police Department. They have a behavioral health specialist and a paramedic. And in 2020, they had just a 6-month pilot to get started. And the reason I mentioned that both of those programs are within the police department, our program is going to be under the Health and Human Services Department. So it's not, because we heard a lot from our community here that we should be diverting resources from the police department and putting them more directly into human services. So that's going to be one big difference for us. Okay.
Eleanor, but
Sure.
it's surprising that those programs are basically daytime as opposed to evening, because I would think that there'd be more incidents in the evening than the daytime. But apparently that's not right.
Well, the Denver program was just a pilot, and it was only in just one part of the downtown, actually. And I think as it expands, it's first of all, it's going to expand to all parts of the community, but also I think expanded hours. So I think it was really to try to just sort of see how it worked in a more limited setting. And then in Olympia, Washington, a really big part of what they do is work with the homeless population. And, they almost have like a tent city. And so it was kind of more of the need was really there in the daytime, and the business community in particular said we really need help with the homelessness issue. But there too, their program that was just getting started, and I think over time it might evolve there as well. So basically the Human Services Committee, I think we met for the month of August and most of the month of September, meeting pretty much weekly. And we concluded that we really did want to try to set up an alternative response program for Evanston, but that we really should form a subcommittee to work specifically on that question, as opposed to monopolizing the Human Services Committee meeting all the time. And so this subcommittee, Alderman Cicely Fleming volunteered to be the chair, and she identified these individuals that you see on the screen here to be members of the committee. It's been a really great committee, and Cicely's done a really great job as the chair of the committee. But we have, as you can see, some pretty people who are pretty well informed about the mental health issues and the substance abuse issues, and really helpful contribution to the discussion. Evangeline Seamark, her son was teenage son was shot and killed, so she looks at the whole response program as so important for the survivors of crises. And then Angela, a small business owner, so she can provide that perspective as well. And then we've had Chris Voss has sat in on a lot of those meetings, and then Deputy Chief Aretha Barnes has been part of the committee. So it's been really some great conversations. And this committee also has continued to meet pretty regularly, basically 3 or 4 times a month from October up until the present. We had a conversation early on with the city manager about how much money she could find for us, and She said, well, you know, we came up with $200,000, which is of course pretty modest beginning. We thought probably our program wasn't going to really get started until halfway through 2021. So the $200,000 only needed to stretch across 6 months. And in fact, it's going to get started a little bit, you know, later than that. And it's funded by 2 positions that were held vacant in the 2021 budget. So we can really say to the community that the program is being funded by redirecting funds from the police department. We did look at some communities that have a co-responder model, and that's where the crisis call comes in and a police officer goes along with a social worker. But we really felt very strongly that our community wanted a non-police response model. So Chris Voss mentioned the possibility of our response team going out with a police officer, but I would imagine that that would not happen very often. Cicely and I just had a Zoom conversation with some people, some of the police department in Skokie, and they're looking at setting up a co-responder model. And that's what Chicago has just started as well. So the response team that we're proposing will have a clinically licensed behavioral health professional, along with a peer support staff person who will have that lived experience with either mental illness or homelessness or substance abuse. It's going to be 5 days a week, probably for an 8-hour shift, but we're going to wait for the agency that responds to our RFP to kind of tell us how they think it would work best. But we looked at the data on the 911 calls, and it seemed to us that the late afternoon and then into the evening, when a lot of the social service agencies of course are closed, that those were the hours which seemed to be needing this kind of response program the most. That's not to say we wouldn't need them at 3 a.m, but this time frame we think will help the most, at least initially for the beginning. In order to make this work, of course, the city is going to provide a vehicle for the response team. It needs to be a rather large vehicle, like an SUV or a van, because oftentimes it seems for the Cahoots program, for example, they end up transporting people sometimes to the hospital, sometimes to a shelter. So it's important to be able to transport people to places. There's obviously going to be a ton of training. Cicely and I talked with the Cahoots folks about they offer a lot of training and consultation with all the communities across the country that are really catching on to and getting interested in this kind of a program. So we've talked about a training program for our 911 dispatchers to basically interact with the Eugene dispatchers and learn what kinds of tips they might have about how to decide exactly which kinds of calls are really appropriate for our alternative response team. Obviously, a lot of training for the response team. They need to learn how to understand the radio communications from our police department, and then some team building, because we want our dispatchers to actually know the response team members, so that, you know, it's going to require building trust between the dispatchers thinking they can send this response team out to a crisis situation, and the team being able to know that they can trust the dispatchers to send them to a place that's not going to be dangerous. Just a minute here. Okay. I didn't know if I talked about that. So the police department's going to outfit the vans or the SUV with an iPad, I think it is, that's going to be connected directly with the police department. So the police department at all times will know where the van is, and the team members will be able to be in instant communication with the police in case they do get to a situation that turns out to be one where they really do need a police backup. So we need to make sure that everybody's comfortable, both in terms of dispatching people to the right place and then the team feeling that they're going to be comfortable when they show up. So here's our timeline. Cicely and I are feeling a little frustrated that it's taken us this long to get here, but the RFP is going to be going out next week. And it's going to be for a 1-year contract with an option to renew for another year. So it's obviously going to straddle into 2022, when of course we're going to ask for a lot more money in the 2022 budget. The deadline for proposals will be June 10th. And so the hope is then we'll be hiring and training the response team members in July and August. We want to do a big community education campaign. Residents need to know that this program exists. They need to know if they call 911 that they might see the response team and not a police officer. We want all the nonprofits in the community that might be resources for the response team to know who the response team is. Just really important for the community to know what the team is about and why we're doing it and what to expect. So I think our hope is to have this team on duty by the end of the summer. The subcommittee is going to continue to stay in existence, meeting monthly, and we want to have monthly reports from the response team and be able to address any issues that come up as soon as we possibly can. And then obviously ask for increased funding in the 2022 budget. Let me see how I'm doing here. People often say, well, so is this going to save Evanston? Is that going to save a lot of money in our police budget? Are we going to be able to cut a bunch of officers, et cetera? And we don't really know. But if you look at the data from Cahoots, which has been going now for over 30 years, the budget for Cahoots is $2.1 million. Cahoots covers both Eugene and Springfield, 2 communities that combined have a $90 million budget. But the Cahoots teams answered 18% of the Eugene police calls, roughly 24,000 calls in 2019. They only requested a police backup 250 times. And the estimate is they saved Eugene $8.5 million in police and fire responses that didn't have to come from the police and fire department. So obviously, that's a much bigger program for a much bigger community than we're talking about here in Evanston. But I think over time, it probably will translate into less demand on our police department. But I think, in my view, the real reason we should do this program is it's going to provide a much better outcome for the individuals in crisis. It's going to not only give them the kind of support they need in the moment, but because this team will be able to follow up with them the following day, later in the week, to make sure they get connected with the counseling services or job referral or something that might help them really get on the right road. So I think it's worth doing, even if it doesn't save us any money, but just because of the better response for a really vulnerable group of people in our community. So that is my talk here. Let me get up here. And I'm happy to answer the questions.
Eleanor, on the last slide, you said the police budget. What is the police budget for Evanston?
It is, I used to know all those numbers by heart. I want to say it is $30 million. So roughly a third of the Eugene police budget.
Eleanor, and I put this question in chat. I'll just ask you.
Sure.
It seems to me that there's a lot of good information there and a lot of good numbers. There must be some estimate of the number or the percentage of calls that you think
Mhm.
could be handled in Evanston by this team?
Yeah.
Seeing that anywhere. So this could be data-based,
Yeah, well, we got pages and pages of data about
Right.
the 911 calls, and it's hard to know whether they would be categorized the same way if we had this response team. So I would say easily several hundred calls, but
for what period of time?
over a year.
A year?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
So several hundred out of,
Oh dear. I can.
244,000, I think, was one of the numbers that Chris.
right.
Yeah.
So that's a very small percentage.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And I think, well, and I think we're just, maybe as the program grows and it's not just 5 days a week and it's not just, those 8-hour shift, we'll have to see how the program grows, but I think everybody's going to be cautious at the beginning. I think the dispatchers are going to be extra careful when they decide a particular crisis situation is appropriate for the response team. And then as people get more comfortable with identifying the right situations, they'll be more comfortable sending the response team. So I think it'll grow over time.
Connie?
It seems to me that this is a very good plan and would address issues of mental health and perhaps substance abuse and homelessness.
Mhm.
But it doesn't address the kind of issue that precipitated the murder of George Floyd, where he was, simply trying to pass a $20 bill, supposedly, a
Mhm.
counterfeit bill. It doesn't address the issue of traffic stops that have gone bad and resulted in killings. It doesn't address the issue of I'm blanking on his name, the man who was shot and paralyzed because of a custody dispute. So it seems to me this plan is very good, but it falls short of addressing violent police responses to misdemeanor offenses.
Mhm.
So has your committee, your team thought about that at all, or you're just focusing on this area?
I'd say that's the subcommittee is really only focused on the emergency response program. The question of, does our police department, do they need more training? Do they need to change their procedures and all those kinds of things? That's more of a discussion for the Human Services Committee, which does deal with the police issues. I saw an interesting proposal or article recently about, why do we have police officers doing our traffic stops, armed police officers? I mean, I think there are some ideas out there that we should be talking about. But no, the short answer to your question is no, that's not been part of the purview of this subcommittee.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Just a quick question. I happened to catch on the news, maybe some of you saw it, and I forget what Illinois community it came out of, but there is some community that has now created a database of autistic children.
Mm.
No.
You see that story? It was very interesting because they've offered to share this experience with other communities, and I don't know, it was on like CBS News or something in Chicago recently. And it sounded pretty interesting that there were people, obviously you'd have to have the families would have to give permission for this, but they have a database because police officers not only needed training, but it helped them immensely to know where these people were in the community so that when there were calls, they could respond appropriately. And I just thought that was an interesting twist for what it's worth.
And I have a question that's sort of related to that, and it refers to something you said. one, your committee has representatives of some of the social service agencies in town. And I get the feeling that you think maybe one of those agencies they'll be putting proposals forward. And I mean, you talked about follow-up that might involve these agencies. And at the same time, my impression is that during the COVID year, the city maybe was collaborating more actively with various agencies in order to respond to health and also homelessness and other issues.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm wondering if you sort of see, that kind of a major shift as well, in which the city is more actively engaging and maybe supporting, but also, kind of building a network of these human services beyond just the city and just any individual agency.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there has been greater collaboration and forging of partnerships during the pandemic. I don't know if you know, so Mayor Haggerty has been having regular weekly conference calls with a whole, basically every possible sector of the community. And so some of those nonprofits have been working in subcommittees together during the pandemic, the mental health community, for example. So I think that's creating a network that's going to be stronger going forward. In terms of the agencies that I would expect might respond to the RFP, what we need is, we'll be looking for agencies that have experience in providing a crisis response kind of service, which is not what either peer services or impact behavioral health do. So they provide the support, but they're not in the business of a mobile crisis response. One group that does do kind of what we were looking for is Trilogy. And Trilogy is one of the groups that we talked to while we were gathering fact finding. Thresholds does something along those lines, but given the size of our budget, we are required to go out with an RFP to see who is out there.
Explored the programs that are in Oregon and Colorado and Washington. Did you identify, or were there any instances where this crisis response team felt that their lives were in danger?
Well, I mean, certainly even in the CAHOOTS program talks about a certain small number of the calls each year where they go out with their response team. They do get there and they decide they need police backup. So I would assume that they call for the police backup because they feel that there's some danger there. One of the things that one of the questions that Chris Voss mentioned that the dispatcher asks, one of the 6 or 8 W questions was weapon, because that'll be a really key question. If there's any hint of a weapon or any kind of sort of feeling that there's a violent situation going on, will not be one where they would send the this alternative response team. So, I mean, I think it's a concern, and especially as we get started with the program, it'll be a concern, but I think over time, we'll be able to demonstrate that this alternative response team can respond safely and appropriately and be a really big benefit to the community.
Quick question about the hospitals. Have you been in touch? Have they been involved in this process at all? The local hospitals, the fact that they always have, I know they've got social work departments and.
Yeah. Well, AMITA in particular, because of their 24-hour crisis program. So we've had a couple of in-depth conversations with Amita. I don't know that we ended up
North Shore.
having anybody from North Shore or not.
I'm surprised.
I think the one of the feedback I got was that Amita tends to its patient population is more similar to the kinds of people that we're going to be responding to with our crisis response
That's
program.
probably yeah, that's probably true.
Eleanor, one of the reasons that we're all very interested in this is because as you'll learn at the annual meeting, one of our local programs for next year is medical equity, health equity in Evanston. And
Mhm.
speaking for myself, I mean, I thought of it in medical terms, but others were much quicker to realize that health equity would refer to mental health, and it would refer, I mean, to issues like domestic violence, as well as, more straightforward medical issues. So I think this, this alternate response program is, reflects issues of public well-being and public health in the broad sense that we're going to want to learn lots more about, and we're going to be very interested in watching how this evolves, and also, as you say, how is it evaluated, and then how will it will be able to grow.
Right.
So it's great to get this report at this
Sure.
point in the process.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? There's lots to think about. I have a very small question, which is, you mentioned an organization called Peer Services.
Right.
I don't know about that organization.
They work with people who have substance use issues in particular.
And so the peers are people who've maybe
Well,
experienced.
the it's capitalized. PEER are all capitalized, and it stands for something, but which goes way, way back. And I don't think, but yeah, I really don't know quite what how the name came about.
can find that out.
But they work in particular with people who have, various kinds of substance issues.
And they've had some really good youth programs through the years.
Right. Yeah.
I think I came into contact with them probably 20 years ago.
Mhm.
They're really very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hear too much about them, but
Yeah.
Mary had a question.
Eleanor, what your RFP is due back to you by what date? And what would your next step be, and when do you anticipate?
Right. Yeah. I think, did I say like June?
June 10th, I think you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So it'll go out next week, and then, yeah, whatever I said, June something.
June 10th.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. So the RFP comes in, then we'll have a evaluation committee that will, look at the various proposals and pick the right one. And then, then we have to sign the contracts and all that stuff. And then the agency has to presumably go out and hire some, people to be part of the response team. So that'll take a little while. And then once they get hired, then we'll do this probably about a month of training. So we're talking, the team won't really be up and out in the community till really the end of the summer, I'm afraid. At the earliest.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think this timeline hasn't been bad at all. It takes a while to put these things together.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, right.
I
And
know you may be
it was
impatient.
It was clear from the report that you provided, that you did a huge amount of work, to find out how those other programs work, as well as find out what was happening in Evanston. So,
Right. Yeah. No, it's very impressive how many different agencies and, what the resources are in the community already. And I think this program will probably help knit them closer together.
that will be beneficial as
Yeah.
well.
Right, yeah.
If there are no other questions, we should let you go and relax, and thank you very much for
Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor.
going over so much with us.
Sure. Well, I was happy to be able to talk to you about this, and I look forward to what comes up at the annual meeting then.